Welcome to the fourth youth session of the Russian Jewish Congress. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Vladimir Bermant. I represent the World Jewish Congress, Jewish Diplomatic Corps. As I told people before, those who are interested and young enough to be young Jewish diplomats, please reach out either to me or to one of the World Jewish Congress offices. We are actively recruiting. We would love to have, we are 300 plus young professionals across the world. The World Jewish Congress represents over 100 communities. We would love to have more members here in Russia, but also across the world. With that, let me switch into Russian for a second. Наша сессия сегодня называется
Today's session is called Togliatti History X.
History X.
Togliatti History X.
Много и часто, как евреи, как
as Jews and as victims of radicalism, talk about radicalism a lot, but this is usually done at the conceptual and abstract level. But today we are going to emerge into this issue, and we would have a unique and very informative session. First, the speakers would talk about themselves, and then we would start the interactive part of the discussion. And I hope that everyone in our hall and on the I encourage you to ask questions on the internet, and the best question would receive an award.
We encourage maximum interactivity during the session, and we encourage online participants to pose questions in the online forum. The best question will get an award. We'll reveal the nature of the award later, but of course it's magnificent. Приз мы раскроем чуть позже, но приз замечательный. Окей, я передаю слово нашему первому спикеру, чтобы он представятся все.
I give the floor to our first speaker and then the others. Sergey, please.
Добрый день, уважаемые друзья.
Good afternoon, dear friends. My name is Sergey Lecturovich. I'm a businessman, entrepreneur, and today I would like to talk about a little story that happened to one small boy. This boy was born in a regular Soviet family of intelligence, Soviet intelligence. As a child, he loved to play chess. He was interested in radio electronics and was in a special radio electronics club. And if life went in a different way, then probably he would have become a typical nerd, head of an IT company. Maybe he would have traveled to the Silicon Valley to overtake it. But it all went in a very different way. So he lived in a city of Togliatti in 90s. It was the second criminal capital of Russia, and in each building you were able to find syringes. The floor where the boy lived, the neighborhood kids, in no time turned into drug addicts, and then there was a drug brother. And the mother of this child was afraid that he would also mix in with bad people. His mother was a doctor, and his father was an investigator for special cases in the police. It was rather dangerous to walk through Togliatti, not only for those who were different. For example, in terms of the length of their hair, one could have suffered because of his hairstyle. If a young person in Togliatti was wearing an earring, a boy, then this was also a risk posed to his health. So this boy was rather kind. At some point, he was quite obedient. He participated in mathematical Olympiad games and competitions, had various interests in this area. And he decided that he doesn't want to remain weak. So he started to think about how to become strong. First, he found someone who's like him, like-minded people. And you know that for a teenager, it's important to belong to a group. So first he found people who were interested in rock underground things. Then he found football fans, and then skinheads.
месяцев
In a couple of months,
превратился
this boy turned
послушного
from an obedient motherling into a head
достаточно
of a rather violent
группировки,
grouping,
молодежной группировки.
youth grouping, of course.
Бандит он идти не мог,
He
так как
could not turn into a cutthroat because of his father being a policeman. But the second
телевидение,
power that all the media was talking about, all the newspapers and TV, was about ultra-rightists,
произошло очень быстро.
ultra-right groups and wings. So this transformation happened
И
in no time. So he turned into a dumbhead, an aggressive dumbhead. I know his story very well because that boy is me.
почему я сегодня здесь?
So why am I here today? And as whom? As who? I'm here not just as an entrepreneur, businessman, but also as a participant of the trustee fund of the Russian Jewish Congress on contradiction of xenophobia and anti-Semitism.
Мне кажется, что
I think that
наша дискуссия может быть
today's discussion would be useful because I know how it's like to be on the other side of over the other side of the fence. What a young person, or young people, or maybe not even that young people think and feel.
ксенофобия.
Those who face xenophobia, and those who profess xenophobia.
Себе задает
What are they looking for there? What questions do they pose, and what answers do they get? I think that the title, Protecting the Future, of our conference, it's important not only to protect it, but as Alexander Asmolov said yesterday, it's important to create future, to build it,
давать молодежи
to give the youth
идеалы, потому что
right ideals and values. Because in the 90s and beginning of 2000, the state politicians on youth matters did not exist. There were no heroes for the youth.
все герои были
All of these heroes were either cutthroats, for example, remember the TV series Brigade,
подростки
where
мечтали
and many teenagers dreamed of looking like Sasha Bailey,
фильм американский,
the character from there, or the American Story
который
X,
мы в то время смотрели и
the
восхищались,
movie that we back then watched and admired.
о котором говорит этот фильм.
We didn't know what the movie was about. The fact that the friends of the main character were either died or imprisoned, and that there is a lot of chaos and violence. We just saw
И слепо за ней шли.
the might, and we were following it blindly. So it's important to find the language
Говорить с
that we would use to talk to teenagers and to adolescents, for this not to be the language of the adults, no, the prophetizing, the moralizing,
указаний,
the language of orders,
примеров. Важно говорить с
but rather it's important
на их языке, чтобы
to speak to them
если у нас
so that we are heeded by them. And if we are able to do this today, I'll be glad. Thank you.
Соблазн, брутальная сила.
The temptation to resort to brutal force is something powerful, but the examples of successful de-radicalization are very well known because there are few of them. And among the Jews, I think that you're probably the only person in here. So it's very valuable for us that you're here with us today and we can learn our lessons from you and learn from your experience.
Panelist. Vera, floor is yours.
Okay. So I welcome you here. Very interesting. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My name is Verata. I am an expert from the University of Pandion in Athens for political science and an expert on youth radicalization in Europe and in Greece. I am particularly interested in having a conversation with Sergei. His history is very interesting, not only for us today, but also for a lot of young people outside there. Maybe waiting to hear strong messages towards them in order to prevent their radicalization or their integration into this violent milieu. I would like to ask you an opening question. If you were to speak with young today, what would you say to him in order not to enter into such an organization and into such a violent environment? Thank you.
Спасибо за вопрос, Вера.
Thank you for your question, Vera.
Мне кажется, здесь
I think that it's important here
мы скажем молодежи,
not just what you say to the youth, what I would say to the youth, but the way how you say this, the way you get the ideas across. Because
в каком состоянии находится подросток в начале своей
where is this teenager, and in what time is he at the beginning of his life? He is inconfident. He doesn't know what life has in store for him. When he cannot identify himself, he doesn't know who he is and what he means in this world and in this space. How can I achieve success? How can I achieve
в том числе массовая информация, где мы видим только негативные новости.
fulfillment of one's dreams? And now in the media, where we see only aggressive agenda, where there is always a depiction of an enemy, this might also include some criminal components. These might be immigrants or peers or adults, whoever. So it seems that this teenager is trapped into this paradigm, ours and others. So it's not the teenager's responsibility. It's not like he is building his own future, but he's rather a victim of this future or someone's actions. So the first thing I would tell to this teenager, I think I would support these teenagers. I would talk about their doubts. I would think I would show loving attitude towards them, because this is the most important thing that all the teenagers need, and any person in the world actually,
Замечательно.
for that matter.
Можно
Great.
на экране показать
Can you please show our panelists on the screen?
следующего панелиста?
Now let's
В онлайне.
turn to our next panelist, Alexander Grigorievich. Mr. Smolov, please.
Я вас приветствую.
I greet you. My name is Alexander Smolov, head of the Psychology School of the Moscow State University,
Совета.
member of the Civic Council of the Russian Jewish Congress. What's happening now, what is discussed now, is of great importance to me for a number of reasons.
Как работать и жить, даже не работать, а жить с молодежью.
It's hard to not only work with the youth, but live with them. Not only with the radicalized youth, but also youth in general. We are in the situation of the failure of the Russian Jewish policy. So what's happening today, and what Sergei was talking about, and here in front of me, I saw his book. It was hard at first, but incredibly important. So the thing is that in all the times, the youth has always been the spread of misbehavior. So the best books on this is the book of an English methodologist, Roma Hare, The Rules of Disorder, and a well-known book, Behind the Mirror. So there are a lot of books on the fans of movies and so on. But in case of Sergei, there's a unique case because there is the transformation of a person. So we can clearly see how this person was able to transform his values. Thus, we have a great example. So that when we talk to the youth, we could somehow
образец.
cite his example for him to be an exemplary for identification. And in my view, Sergei is a unique example, and he could have become a role model, a cultural hero for the youth, so that they could compare themselves to him and level up with him. So here I would like to suggest the following. We can discuss for endlessly within our Russian Jewish Congress this situation, but these are the lessons for the future. The new chairperson on the youth policy of Russia, under the president, became the governor of the Yamal-Nenetsk district, Dmitry Alekhanov. He's 33 years old. He knows how to understand the youth. So here, in this situation, he would probably look for partners to foster youth policies. So it's important for the life program of Sergei to be known to the youth and to be one of the options to discuss during the building of the youth policy. I feel like this program is rather optimistic, because when we talk about skinheads, when we talk about certain representatives of various forms of nationalism and xenophobia, we haste to put we believe that their situation is helpless, because we believe that there's nothing to be done with them. But Sergei's story is unique, and it shows that the path of our life is a story of the alternatives that you have. So you had an option to build a different life at certain points of your life, not full of hatred to everyone, but full of open promises and prospects. This already was heard here, but still, xenophobia is not about eliminating diversity. Xenophobia is based on the opposition, ours, others, us against them. So the youth policy, the policy of tolerance and multiculturalism, has to show clearly that success is not with those who eliminate diversity, but with those who support it. I have always been saying that political dinosaurs had been extinguished long ago because they were not sensitive to diversity, to the foreign, to the otherness. So when we see the phenomenal case or such a story, life story, when we show how this sensitivity can be acquired, something confusing or outraging, here's the prospect that I see. The other, the different, is something that is valuable to the youth policy in general, including the policy that would allow us to weaken the incentive power of xenophobia, especially in our society, where the key issue is how to remain a human in a humanless era. So what we've been listening to today is one of the values and mindsets that helps us to find a way and to build some anthropological man-made actions for us to live in the world without xenophobia, in a world full of tolerance, support for tolerance and diversity, and the main culture in the world, that is the culture of dignity. Thank you very much. I am soon to start my lecture on the evolution of the personality development. Unfortunately, I was able to be present only at the beginning of this session, but what Sergei is doing for our Russian Jewish program, but I hope that for our program this is important too. I'm not saying this in Jewish, but it's called Light for Goya. Thank you very much for such a humanistic contribution, well-informed contribution to our discussion, academic one. So one of the fundamental concepts in Judaism is the choice of action, the free will. But of course, everyone understands that to a certain extent and in certain contexts, the free will becomes much more complex than in normal situations. So you were right in saying that Sergei is a hero because finding a way out of radicalism and extremism is a heroic deed, indeed. So the fact that you contribute that you support the contribution of Sergei and the Jews into the radicalization of the society is a great example of how the Jews can bring light to the societies. You also mentioned the book of Sergei. Can we have a close-up? It's called...
Terrifying.
At first, it would be terrifying. It's Sergei's book, and this is a prize for the best question. But I don't see questions so far from the internet platform, so please ask questions, and the best answer would receive this book as a prize. I hope that this person wouldn't need any radicalization, but still, it would be interesting to read it.
To the last, but certainly not least, panelist, my friend and colleague in the Jewish Diplomatic Corps, Reuben from Austria. Reuben, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Reuben Raynard. I'm from Vienna, Austria. I originally studied at the University of Vienna political science and strategical communication. I am very happy to have the opportunity to participate in this esteemed panel here today and have the option also to discuss with experts. I am part of the Jewish Diplomatic Corps of the World Jewish Congress since 2018, and I am professionally working as a political consultant in Austria. I was asked to briefly speak about the developments of right-wing radical xenophobic movements in Austria and Western Europe. I will not make it very long, but I have decided basically to focus on one aspect that I think is quite important when we look at this, which is the communications aspect of it. Unfortunately, the topic of your conference is highly relevant and has been highly relevant for the past decades, but especially so during the current pandemic. We see, and I'm sure that I am not the only one having this experience here, and our community in Vienna, we see that there is a significant uptick in racist and anti-Semitic statements coming from a scene of protesters who protest against government measures against the current pandemic. And what I wanted to talk about for a second, and would be interested in the opinions on how to tackle this, is basically to highlight how this has come about. What we see in Austria a few years ago and in Western Europe is that there has been a movement of a neo-fascist youth movement, basically the identitarian movement, which originally comes from France. It is very popular and strong in Germany and as well in Austria. And it basically changed the way that right-wing extremism operates among youngsters. What has changed? Like the classical picture in the past of Nazi skinheads is not quite as popular nowadays as it maybe used to be at some point. And unfortunately, what happened is that extreme right-wing movements have realized that they have a very relatively small reach in society, and there's a certain potential they can reach, and that is quite small. It was never to be a mass movement. Neo-Nazism in Germany and Austria after the Second World War, it was a problem, and it still is a problem, but it was never a mass movement. What happens is with the identitarian movement, it basically comes and it makes it has a much broader appeal. It transports the same content or similar content but has a very broad appeal. And the way this happens, it seems, is by reframing the debate on societal issues. And this reframing is something that happens like through language in our discourse. And this is something that I know in the German-speaking countries and media is happening quite successfully, unfortunately. And I believe that this is a major contribution to the fact that that positions that were unthought of a few decades ago have managed to enter our discussions and our discourse at the very center of the political world, so to speak. I want to give a couple of examples of what am I talking about. The strategy of the new right here basically is to reframe, as I said, to reframe the debate. That could mean, for example, that by setting the stage, by using certain terms and introducing them on social media and in public debates, the goal is not to actually take over, and the goal is not to get elected. The goal is to create the frame in which media will cover certain topics. To make it a little more tangible, in general, not connected to this, in the US, for example, the United States, there has been a very successful language frame that has been introduced, which is basically the word death tax for inheritance tax. So people who are against taxing inheritance came up with the idea to henceforth call it a death tax. Death tax, as you can imagine, is a much stronger word and transports a message with it that people understand rather quickly and grasp quickly, and that there's a lot of opposition. It's a term that creates a lot of opposition from people who hear that in the media, and within a few years, it has been achieved in the United States debates and in the media to basically replace the word inheritance tax with the word death tax. And I think you guess where I'm trying to go. This is not connected to our topic, but we see the same principle being used in our debates on those things that unfortunately are a danger to the unity of our societies.
Let me
could be, as I said.
Sorry, Reuben, it's a fascinating topic you raise. I want to explore the tension between emotive terminology and the projection of extremist ideology on one hand, and the fundamental economic conditions on the other. Let me maybe go to Sergey and then come back to you. Sergey, как вы видите, что более значимо?
Sergey, what do you see? What is more important in radicalization? Objective economic realia, like in Togliatti in the 90s, for example, absence of economic growth, no professional ways of growth, or the things that Reuben were speaking about, like toxic rhetoric that is aimed on radicalization through emotional approach, through emotional reframing, or emotional technologies even. What is the first and what is the secondary here? Could you make an assessment here? Yeah, thank you so much for this question. Thank you very much, Reuben, for your idea that was brought to our panel right now. I think the primary thing is here the things that is related in the growth of tension in the society. And when we look at the rhetoric of mass media, for example, what is happening right now, how Reuben replied, like the growth of ultra-nationalists, right nationalists, is seen during the pandemic. We can describe this also. Rhetoric is the secondary tool. Rhetoric is used for support, and the basic here is the human being and the status of human being, the state. In pandemics, the growth in tension in society is growing by multiple times, dozens of times. People are in panic, people are afraid. And if a human being is afraid, is feeling fear, there are two basic reactions: hit or run.
убегает.
Somebody would run, and somebody would find a certain external bad guy. And the rhetoric of ultra-nationalists, ultra-right movements, and so on, it becomes more and more luring. Because the people who are under tension, under pressure, they can find for themselves a certain ready-made, ready-packaged answer. The things that they are not able or not wanting to search.
To Reuben, Vera, as Sergei highlighted, and as statistics and history show, times of economic weakness coincide with radicalization. Obviously, the Second World War is a prime example that we all know about, and all the atrocities that were committed, chiefly the Holocaust, coming from that. In your country, in recent history, Greece went through a depression. Many countries in Europe experienced a significant recession. Greece contracted beyond almost the imaginable for a civilized society. And of course, we saw the emergence of Golden Dawn, a far-right neo-Nazi group that I think has since been proscribed, and we saw the spike in anti-Semitism. Perhaps comment on how were these latent pressures in Greece? Did they develop rapidly? Were they brewing for a long time? And how has the government and society reacted?
So historically speaking, about the economic crisis, the correlation between economic crisis and the rise in the extremes of the extreme right movement, the relationship is positive, historically speaking. But if we speak about the experience of the rise of radical right-wing movements and parties, this hypothesis is not true. What we saw during the economic recession after 2000, after the global economic crisis after 2008, we saw, at one hand, we saw the rise, the phenomenological rise of right-wing movements and party of neo-Nazi party of Golden Dawn. But the development of the rise of the Golden Dawn was steady and preceded the economic crisis in Greece. In fact, the development of the appearance, the emergence, and strength of Golden Dawn started during 1980s in Greece, and it slowly developed itself through the years, and mainly supported by youth, by youngsters in Greece, and it was organized as a militia, Golden Dawn. During 90s, Golden Dawn made a lot of foreign campaigns, as for example in Bosnia-Herzegovina, during the massacre of Srebrenica. And also, they made a lot of demonstrations inside Greece. So after the economic depression, there was this kind of protest, vote protest towards vote of support towards the Golden Dawn. But it was not a genuine vote support. It was a reactionary one that coincided with the economic depression. Yeah, but we now have a lot of radicalization between the youth in Greece, mainly in the schools. So yeah, we have this kind of development lately.
So very interesting. So it sounds like the long-term trends towards radicalization receive an opportunity to go mainstream, as happened in Greece, unfortunately, to some extent, during times of economic turmoil. We'll go back to Reuben, but I will encourage the audience to think of questions, and we'll have an opportunity to take some after the next contribution. Reuben, let me go back to you. When you advise the Austrian government or other actors in the political sphere in your main job, what do you recommend in terms of de-radicalization programs? And perhaps give us one example of success at a policy level. I'm sitting next to a remarkable individual success, but what works at the level of a region and the level of a state?
Yeah, so I am dealing at this point with regional governments, and basically one of the things that we have seen over and over again is that the most successful thing is basically the prevention in the first place. Prevention can happen, and it will be incredibly less work than trying to change the attitudes of people who have been severely radicalized. One of the increasing problems, however, and this is kind of the point I was getting at, is not only people who are enormously radicalized. It is also the problem that certain attitudes are part of our debates nowadays that are dangerous and that eventually lead to radicalization. And I think, and this is one of the
But I would speak about this, really. Sergey, may I add to this question? Reuben is stating basically that preemptive measures are the most efficient. So you may comment on this, but I have one more question. Do we need to arrest or to use other legal recourse against the leaders of these movements as a preemptive tool? So I think we will speak about the arrests and about legal part a bit later. At first, I wanted to join Reuben about the previous measures and preemptive measures. I, together with my team, we are working against fires, and we are providing for protection against fire. And every fireman would speak about the prophylactics. That means not extinguishing, but proactive approach. That means we need to create the proactive media where the fire would be a minimum possible case. I think the main thing is for the youth. If we are, as a state, setting the goal of supporting the youth, supporting of de-radicalization of youth, if the state has a good policy on youth, if there are alternatives, interesting tasks for the youth, and more to this, if there are right models, because this is very important, what we see in the movies, what are the role models. And I'm not only speaking about Russian movies right now, I'm speaking about American or European cinematography, and so on and so forth. But who is the leader in movies right now? Who is the main hero? What is this hero's journey? And we need to use our capacities and to work on good examples. We need to analyze what is youth doing during the free time, and then we will not recourse to some arrests. Because if you have to arrest somebody, this is also hate, and hate generates hate here. And we are a bit late at this stage. Then, if we would be proactive. So, right pictures are, of course, very important. And from Alexander, we have heard that you, Sergey, Mr. Lecturovich, you are the good example. So we are supporting this also. There was also one question from the hall. Greetings, Sergey. You've told briefly about how did you get to this radicalized youth group. But speaking about your milieu, what was the motivation for you to leave this milieu? Were there some internal motives or some external, rather? Thank you. Could you please present yourself? Maria, school teacher from Petrozavodsk, Russia. Yeah, lifestyle question from a teacher, school teacher. Yeah, Maria, thank you very much for your question, and I will try to reply briefly, but again, I hope I will add some depth here. So, how did I get into this movement?
Как попали те
I mean
ребята
skinheads, and how the guys are
со мной. И
are heading towards this movement. Even inside the movement, we've passed similar multiple transformations. The first was the
ненависти
way of hate, the way of fighting on the street and so on, street fighters' way, so to say. But then we arrived at the question.
же драки были не просто
So,
так.
okay, there should be some value in our street fighting. It seemed to us that we are handling some problems of a country, of people living here. It seemed to us that we may correct something, but then later I got this understanding that this activity will lead to nowhere.
Кроме
I will be wounded, or they will be wounded, I will come in jail, I will harm other people and harm myself. Then we created the
альянс,
movement like National Alliance. It was a patriotic movement.
искали
And then we've tried to search for other meanings.
через некоторое время
And a certain time passed, and then national patriotic agenda was left. And then we were engaged into social agenda. We were fighting for Legotas, for social networks in Russia. But then after a certain time, I was not very interested in policy, not anymore. And then I started to study at the Russian Academy at the RENEPO Moscow Business Academy. And after 1 year of study, I've established my own enterprise. This is how it looks for me, from my side. By the way, I wanted to add here, when we were engaged in these activities, of course, we were object of surveillance of different special services. And what do I want to say? How the police is countering this? So was countering at my time. This was aggression against aggression.
как раз
Arrests, again,
в той же парадигме.
they were basically working in the same paradigm. That means as if they were the same and they were just not sitting in the other chair. Because hate is every time generating only hate. And hereby I want to say that only care, only love and attention, and I think right or warm conversation could melt down the heart of a young adult or of a young guy who is misleadingly going somewhere else. So thank you. You were speaking about the ideas in the life and about the sense, the essence. And all the studies in different contexts are saying that the main idea is, the general idea is playing a huge role. Like, for example, manager may say that I will pay more and people will work better. But no, it's not the way. The essence of your work, the sense of your work, and the main idea that is lying behind your work is about you. And Judaism is also speaking about this. Awareness is the key motive of any life. So there were certain more questions, I think. Eric?
Introduce yourself briefly.
Hello, Sergey. Eric, I'm co-director for International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, and I have a question for you. I read a little bit about you, about your history before that camp, and we are all here, we want to learn from you. So we meet many times some extremists, and I have a question. When you meet your former friends, because what I know that your former friend, they hate what you call in Russia the black people and the Johnny. So if you meet a former friend, what you would say to him, how you can speak with him, because we really want to learn from you how we can speak with other people. Thanks for your job. Very nice job.
I should say one of the great things about a conference like this is the audience you can reach. In Eric's case, Eric travels non-stop and he meets with heads of states. He's going to meet the king of a country next week, and he's a very significant multiplier. So if he can carry your message to the right place, that is very powerful, and perhaps this conference was organized for the answer you're about to give, Sergey.
Спасибо большое, Эрик,
Thank you so much, Eric.
за вопрос.
Again, thank you very much for your question. And speaking about the gist, let us speak about the friends. Yes. When we speak about the people who were together with me in this movement,
Неудивительно, но
it may be surprisingly, although, but many of them have changed their paradigm in their life. Somebody became a good marketologist, somebody is a host on the radio, somebody is an entrepreneur. Not everybody, of course. They are the people who are on the same level. What to say to them, what could I say to them? I would think there would be no one phrase. I'm pretty sure, but I would do the first. I would give them a possibility to enter a training of personal growth, because they need to understand that everything that is happening is because of them, not because of some evil guys who are staying behind. And it's all in their hands, and they can make more out of this, out of their position right now. And this work with awareness, with leadership, I think this is the primary tool in these deeds, in the countering of xenophobia, in countering of anti-Semitism or other extremities.
May I ask, please, Sergey, one question. Why, Sergey, did you hate the persons that you attacked? What was the basis of the hatred? The driving motor for hatred?
So it seemed to me at that moment that they, especially they, are the source of problems that are happening in the youth. It seemed to me that they are the ones, so the guests from Caucasus, for example, Northern Caucasus Russian, that they were the owners of some shops, small shops, of restaurants, of some gambling machines. And Russian youth was at that time working at some low positions at them. It seemed to me that it is unfair. We were coming there not to create some new workplaces. It was very simple. Here is an enemy, and I need to correct the situation.
One more question, please. What were the benefits or the advantages and the disadvantages that you took during your stay in these movements?
Какие были преимущества?
So, what could be the benefit for the youth in taking part of this?
Personally speaking, and then generally.
Очень интересный вопрос.
So, thank you very much for this very interesting question, Vera.
Что меня привело в это движение?
So, at first I want to say what did lead me to take part in this. What was I searching for? I was searching for force. When I am alone, I do not trust myself. I am very weak, and I am
И мне небезопасно.
susceptible to some threat, and it was not safe for me. But at first, when I found this group, it was a kind of a mesmerizing. Like, it seemed to me, I found my brothers, I found my power, and together we can do anything. And everybody is afraid of us. And this unity, this was the unity on the blood. And still, this is not what will bring some happiness or love. This was the unity on the hatred. By the way, we have one more question from the hall, and I think it should be a good one.
Я тоже учитель истории.
I am also a history teacher from small city in Tver region, Likhoslavl city, and I have a practical question, because the previous questions were the ones that I wanted to speak about. But Sergey, I have the practical situation. After the school, I go home, there are some girls running there afraid and saying, look, our guys are now saying like hello to each other as the Nazis. We have seen this in the movies, and they are explaining this like we we cannot hail each other. There is the pandemics, and therefore we are hailing each other in the Nazi way. So we need to make something. And I come home and I think, so what do I will need to say? Persecute, provide for examples. They are of the fifth grade, and here I see some good old lady who was a child during the Second World War, and I invited her to the school, and he told me, yes, okay, I will come to you. She's older than 80 years old, and before I let the floor to her, I showed a film of Soviet movie about the children's concentration camp, when there is commission coming to the concentration camp, making assessments. Then I was showing how Nazis are hailing each other, and then I told the pupils that you have a unique possibility to speak to the person who lived at this time when this was the social practice for the Nazis. And the people were starting to listening to this Galina Golubeva. She was speaking about the Second World War. She was speaking about how it was, and she's a very tiny lady. And after the final, these two guys who were sitting in just different corners of the class, they came to her, they hugged her and told, we beg our pardon, please forgive us. And then she asked, why are they begging for forgiveness? I was not saying to her, Sergei, what would be your way? So you speak that we need to say everything on the language of children. So did I make it correct in a correct way? Did I miss something? Thank you. So at first, thank you very much for this question and for this deliberate story and example. It's a vivid example. There is no right answer, right or wrong. But speaking about the reaction, I think it was a correct way to deal with this topic. But again, when we speak about my personal experience, that my grandmother, the mother of my father, she was in the concentration camp. I think it was Dachau in Germany. And my story, when I was her story, when I was 14 years of age, were not something special for me. It seemed a bit too far for me. But the thing, how you did this, by the movie, by the great example, by the concentration camp survival and survivor. And as I understand, there was a free dialogue, so warm dialogue, without any critics, without any attacks, and without any recourse to some morality here, but just to provide an in-depth view of the story. And perhaps this is the best way to make it. Thank you. Yes, it seems to me that it is very important that we have two questions here from school teachers, because the struggle for the heart of youth is in the families, in the schools. In Judaism, we are speaking about mother. The mother is the one who is carrying the culture, and I think that the women who are teachers are more expressly here in countering the anti-Semitism. And I think that school and family is the key, two key places here. And let us come back to the Reuben again.
I know there has been significant focus on extremism, in particularly Islamism, in the educational system. I know the government has banned various extremist materials and even teachers from schools. How do you screen to make sure that educators educate and not abuse young people?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult question. As you said, basically in Austria, there has been some legal motion to basically outlaw certain aspects, especially
Возможно, мы опять Рубена потеряли.
Perhaps we've again lost the connection.
Сергей, пожалуйста.
Yes, Sergei, please, you may add here. So again, I wanted to speak in detail about the things that Vladimir outlined and about the words of our colleagues here about the school, really. I think this is a very important and perhaps the key element here in the education of youth. And here, as of today, from my standpoint, it seems to me that we are not performing very well here. We could do it better. What is school doing right now? The school is giving some basic knowledge, but it does not provide for any skills. By skills, I mean lifestyle skills, life orientation, leadership skills. And as soon as a child doesn't have these leadership skills, then the child is subject to certain movements or organizations that are not the best one for the child, at least. I think we need to provide for more study of leadership, to give more training here in this realm, to teach how to choose in the right way, and how to be capable of choosing, and not only rendering some knowledge for the classical knowledge database. I think that Sergei now outlined a very important thing, and this was also a topic of my consideration, because we are speaking about education, and speak about education as the Swiss Army knife, that it would close everything. But many evil guys were very clever. There were PhD or doctors in philosophy among Nazis.
So just textbooks are not enough and institutions are not enough. Civilization includes classical literature and music, as important as it is, but also some liberal arts and humanistic skills are very important, and it's the hardest to teach these parts of life. But it is of great importance. We have one more question from the hall. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Stephen Braun. I'm also a co-director of the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue. But in my other hat, I taught for 40 years at Rutgers University, which was a hotbed of conflict between Palestinian groups and Jewish groups, between white and black, between gay and straight, and so on. And I have to say, this is a very provocative discussion, but I look at this very differently. I'm not sure role models are the way to go. Let me give you an example. One of my students, who was a semi-criminal, I guess, came up to me after one of my classes. I was teaching Martin Luther King and his famous I Have a Dream speech, which is one of the great speeches in American history. He came up and said, "You know, Professor Brunner, I really enjoyed the way you taught Martin Luther King. And I taught Martin Luther King as a pragmatic strategist, not as a moralist." And I said, "Oh, that's nice." Then he said, "You know what happened to me? I was kicked out of high school because I heard the I Have a Dream speech, and I said, this is a lot of crap." That's the attitude. And you can't find a greater role model than Martin Luther King. The possibility of doing something, of changing your life as an individual, is very different from how you actually fight these movements on a social level. The idea that this is simply a function of economics, I think, is a deep mistake. That was never the case in the United States. After the Great Depression, in fact, the amount of radicalism on the right went down, not up. The great rise in radicalism among the Ku Klux Klan happened in the 1920s, when times were good, not when times were bad. Also, and this is, by the way, also true in the 50s, when times were good, not were bad. Language, I think, is completely overrated as a tool. The basis for the movements in the United States, and that's true in Germany also, these are the same states, the same classes, the same areas. You go back to the beginning of the country and slavery, you will see exactly the same areas, mass base, and so on for right-wing activity. There's been no change. And the language that's employed is all structured not for the outside world, but for the world inside. So, for a very simple example, we speak of the Civil War. You've all heard of the American Civil War. That's set in the North, not in the South. In the South, it's the war between the states. In other words, it's fought over the right of states to make decisions. Of course, that the decisions were about slavery is forgotten. And so what I think is the kind of, shall we say, conversion experience, that's not going to do it. What's going to do it is getting young people to go out and join movements, join parties, organizations, and stop viewing this as a function of their own, of themselves and their existential problems. We pander much too much. The issue for us, I think, is to find movements for these young people to participate in, and above all, get out of the kind of identity politics that the other side uses. The only successes I know in terms of fighting right-wing extremism is not the identity approach. I find myself as a Jew, I find myself as black, I find myself and so on. It's exactly the opposite. Historically, the great movements that opposed racism were all multicultural and diverse. Civil rights movement, the Popular Front, Willy Brandt's movement in Germany in the 60s. These were the movements that did it. And so it's an issue, not simply learning to work together culturally, it's a question of learning to work together politically and being willing to sacrifice. You know, because anybody can join anything, anybody can make any conversion experience. When you find out it's for real, is when there's a sacrifice from one group to the other. You ask yourself, not only should an absolutist be willing to speak? How do you answer that question? I think there's a very simple answer. It's not whether the absolutist is willing to speak. It's, is the absolutist willing to give the right to another absolutist to speak? We have to build on reciprocity and the liberal rule of law and the great tradition of the Enlightenment, at least as far as I'm concerned, in moving forward.
Thank you. Сергей, вы хотите прокомментировать?
Sergey, do you want to comment this?
Спасибо, Стив.
Thanks, Steve.
Я с вами согласен.
I agree with you.
И поддерживаю вас в том, что
And I support you in the fact that any division
любое разделение — это всегда
is always
никуда.
a path that leads nowhere. We've seen states, several historical examples. For example, there used to be a state that propagated hatred to capitalists. Now there is no such state anymore. There used to be a state that propagated hatred to certain nations, and this state is not here anymore. But today, the world and our country in particular are going along this way, the way of division, the way of hatred, and hatred is just like rust. It sticks and it deteriorates and destroys. It takes a lot of time, but still it gradually destroys. And what is happening now in the course of the pandemic? Do you remember that this used to happen to Jews in Germany when each person had to have a symbol, a yellow star, and the same thing is happening with us with QR codes when people have to fight between each other because whether a person is vaccinated or not, whether the person has a QR code or not. So every time we introduce this fuel to the hatred, then we at some point would have to face the results of this hatred. So our conference is particularly relevant because today in Russia we live in a rather peaceful situation in terms of xenophobia. But if we continue on the same avenue, and I mean here vaccination and QR codes, then this would necessarily lead to something negative and we'll face xenophobia. Thank you. Sometimes I check from time to time the comments on the forum. If there are any comments that I don't see, please tell me.
Vera, over to you.
Vera.
I'd like to ask Sergey, does politics in general is responsible for the rise and strengthening of radical right movements, organizations, and why?
Спасибо за вопрос.
Thank you for the question. Well, politics as an instrument of governing the society is responsible for sure, no doubt.
Те люди, которые выбирали для себя политическое,
And if those people who choose for themselves this political vocation, then they're supposed to understand that from their lifestyle and the values, a lot depends. Sergey, I think it's time for us to choose. Please choose the best question, and we'll ask the awardee out.
все вопросы были...
So all of the questions were very interesting. I'm very grateful to our listeners. They were not easy questions.
определенные рефлексии.
Some of them made me reflect on some of the issues. Some of them made me change my way of thinking, mine and those who are listening to us online. But I would like to highlight the question of a teacher who held a lesson for her teachers, who invited the concentration camp prisoner, and she explained in the language of love what this can lead to. And she built those historical bridges. Svetlana? Thank you.
Ну что, я думаю,
So, I think that here it's time for us to recap the takeaways of our discussion. Obviously, this is a very burning issue. It's quite painful and traumatic. The topic that raised everybody's concern is that that drew our attention is that your history was great. Of course, we need to invite speakers who bring presence all the time. And also, you told us about your life story. And also, this was full of concepts and theoretical input, and things that we've learned from you were very important, and I hope that the exchange with the listeners was useful for you too. I hope that this would be useful for your future activist issues.
Being here with us and providing an academic point of view informed by developments in your country, Greece, which in recent history, unfortunately, have also contributed significantly to this topic. And I want to thank you. And I want to thank the audience for participating. Again, the point of these conferences is to spread light. So hopefully the exchange of ideas, the network, will lead to greater things. And we wish Sergey every success in his business, communal, and societal endeavors. And with that, thank you very much.